First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to introduce our panel. I'm Jeff Edginton. I'm the Materials Solutions Manager for Fusion21. And we have with us John Newcomb, who's the CEO of the BMF, and also Karen Thody, who's a director at Cameron's, and we thank them very, very much for joining us. Could you put the next slide up, please, Andrew? Thanks. Continuing the theme of Fusion21 trying to provide innovation and a fresh approach to procurement, as we move out of lockdown, we thought it would be a good time to assess just where we are at the moment. So we have a number of topics which are the current market direction and that transition out of lockdown as we all get back to normal, hopefully, to explore the current market and the effects that Brexit and the pandemic had on us, which obviously caused project delays and R&M capability and new builds and things like that. What is our condition of our current materials supply chain? And by that, I mean the complete supply chain going all the way through to manufacturing and globally. And then a debate on how we see the future, the demands, the risks, how we work together, resolve issues and establish a business resilience. And this is a different kind of format, ladies and gentlemen. This is not about death by PowerPoint. It's interactive, it's a free and open debate and a look at the market conditions. And to kick things off, I'd like to invite John, if you would, John, to give us perhaps an overview from the BMF perspective and the CLC perspective, and how you see things at the moment. So over to you, John, if I may.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, and hopefully everybody can hear me and see me. Those are the two major requirements. So just a little bit about the organisation that I head up, first of all. So the Builders Merchants Federation is a trade association. We look after the interests of about 400 merchant companies in the UK, operating from just under 6,000 branches. So obviously the names you'll be familiar with are people like Travis Perkins, Dewsons, etc., but a whole host of independent merchants throughout the UK. We also have 250 supplier members in membership, so that can be anybody from Ibstock Bricks through to JCB construction equipment through to Twyford's bathrooms. So a real cross-section of materials manufacturers, distributors, and of course merchants who are selling to predominantly to builders and to small jobbing builders. Where do you start with availability right now? Product availability, really, because of the situation post-COVID, is, and many of my members are saying, it's probably the worst it's been for well over 30 years. So I think we have a number of material issues, probably too many actually to go into detail at an open forum, but whether it's timber, whether it's PIR, whether it's roofing materials, or issues of products that are bought in from the Far East, we have a number of material supply issues, which I chair the product availability group of the Construction Leadership Council. We meet every two to 3 weeks, and there are representatives from across the construction industry on that call. So merchants, manufacturers, contractors, house builders, consultants, etc. And then out of that meeting, we produce a product availability statement, which is a kind of one-page statement on where the sector currently is. So the first thing I would strongly recommend, and we only put the CLC statement on yesterday, is that everybody on the call goes onto the Construction Leadership Council website and downloads the product availability statement, because that will give you a very up-to-date picture with not only the overall situation on availability, but where we actually see the next few months. I'm afraid the situation is going to get worse before it gets better. It's predominantly impacting on my members, the merchant members, and their customers, the smaller jobbing builders. It's fair to say that it really hasn't impacted for contractors, and it's not really impacted on the major house builders. So, the Taylor Wimpey's and the Barratts of this world, and of course they're represented on that product availability group as well. So, and this is not a UK phenomenon. That's the important thing to say to everybody here, that I am the president of the European Trade Association, and if we did this call in Portugal or Spain or Italy or France, we'd be having exactly the same conversations around product availability issues right now. Products like timber is a global material that's purchased in huge quantities by places like the States and China. So this is not a Brexit issue, and it is very much a COVID-related issue, and it's very much a global demand issue. So one of my members, Grafton, they published their figures yesterday. They are trading at 40% up on last year, and that's very consistent with a number of our members right now. So the market is in a very strong situation. We have very, very high levels of demand with very little stock on the ground, and merchants are working all hours to try and service their customers in what is a very difficult availability. I don't like using the word crisis, Jeff, but I think we're as close to a crisis as we can be on product availability and shortages of materials right now.
I would tend to agree. I think we're at the lowest ebb we've been for a very long time as an industry. And a very interesting question from Darren Statham. Do we feel that a shortage of timber may result in less sustainable timber products becoming more common in the supply chain? Wonder whether you want to comment on that, John, because you're quite into that timber area, aren't you?
I mean, timber is the second most important product category to our members. It accounts for probably about 22% of the turnover of a typical builder's merchants, heavy building materials being the largest category. So it's a critical material. It's also a sustainable material, which means, of course, there are only so many logs that we can chop down globally to make timber-related materials. And what we're seeing particularly from China right now, is a huge increase in demand for wooden toys, furniture. I mean, we think of timber in building materials, but timber is used in a whole host of other materials as well. So yeah, I mean the situation with timber is that pretty much and timber imports were up by about 12% in January. So we're bringing more timber materials in. We're having to pay a higher price for those materials, but there literally is no stock on the ground. So any material that's coming in is already coming in for pre-ordered pre-ordered deliveries. So do I see a move away from sustainability because of that reason? Certainly on a longer term basis, no. But do I see short term issues around the availability of that material? Absolutely, yes. So. And that will absolutely continue until at least the fourth quarter of this year.
Right. Thanks for that. Darren, does that answer your question? Perhaps you could open Darren up for me. Can
I just add something to that, Jeff, while Darren comes in? Because obviously we look at timber and we're saying about sustainability, sustainable products. I don't know if everyone saw yesterday, Dow Egberts have actually removed their sustainability accreditations on their coffee, because of exactly the same problem. So where we're sort of seeing that across the sector and across the marketplace, it is a worldwide issue. And if it's affecting coffee beans, I mean, that's one of my biggest practices constantly. So Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, it was an interesting one. Sustainable timber came up in with our environment team the other day. And obviously with the shortages, I mean, last year I couldn't get hold of any fence panels for my own garden. So, construction projects that we're running, we start putting sustainable policies in there, etc. So certainly for the short term, is we're potentially it's going to add delays to projects and increase timescales and obviously increased costs. So it's an interesting one I can feed back on, and maybe it's something we need to address sort of short term. So it's all useful feedback.
Okay, good. Paul Forrester, is the time right to restart a push seen about 15 years ago for a network of building material reuse centres to plug some gaps? Does that how does everyone feel about that? Perhaps John, Karen, what have you got to say about that?
I wasn't in the industry 15 years ago, Paul,
Right.
so I can't comment on that particular concept. It sounds interesting. I'd certainly be interested to hear more about that idea, because quite frankly, any thoughts, suggestions, solutions that people might have to alleviate this this current issue, I'm very open to hearing those suggestions, but I'm afraid I can't comment about that because I wasn't in the industry 15 years ago.
Well, maybe we can pick that up towards the back end of this event, because we've got a piece to look at how we move forward, and perhaps we can return to that in a little while. Paul?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Yeah, I can tell you what I know, but yeah.
Great. Okay. Karen, could you perhaps give us a bit of a comment from the other side of the coin, from the member perspective, about where we are at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I work cross sector. I don't just work in housing. So I'm having a look at who's on the call, and most of you do work cross sector as well. So you'll understand that we are seeing supply chain delays. We are starting to hear about labour shortages as well, which are obviously impacting everything, even people being able to get into factories. So we've got particular problems on site where there are modular builds at the moment. People, again, can't get timber, we're struggling with steel, and actually having people on the ground to be able to work in effective bubbles. And that availability of materials is obviously going to flow through. So even things like, what was it this week? We heard something, car manufacturer. Ford have said that they're going to shut for a 12-week period over the summer because they can't get a particular component. That's not going to just be Ford, that will be Jaguar Land Rover as well. Now, the impact of that is that you then can't get replacement vans, and the guys on the ground then can't get out to do what they need to do as effectively as they perhaps could have done before. So I think from my perspective, sort of sitting ground looking up at you, and particularly at John and his very important job there, it scares me sitting in the same panel as him. Clients need to understand and be really prepared to flex in terms of their contracts, variations, how that pricing is going to work. A lot of particularly my clients haven't really yet understood the potential impacts of this. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what other people are experiencing and what they're hearing on the ground. Trying to get that message across to clients can be challenging at the best of times. They don't want to hear, actually, you've got a boiler replacement programme going on, and it's going to cost you another £500 per unit to do what you previously were going to do. Because that inevitably it impacts budgets and also what they can do with their planned programmes. So we're looking at things like that on the ground. Challenging, Jeff, challenging.
Good. Okay, thanks. Yeah, there have been some significant raw material price increases during the last 12 months. And Andrew, can you just flip to the next slide, please? This might be interesting to everyone. This was issued the last couple of days, and it's showing the commodity prices change in the last 12 months. And if you take the top half of it, the piece that is the red section, you know, the average price increase of these key commodities is over 61% in 12 months. So it shows here that we have got a significant issue with regards to even not alone just getting the stuff, but when you get it, it's going to cost you more. You know, where did the merchant, how were the merchant base able to ride this wave and stock levels? And I'd like to invite any comment from from our merchant participants, if I may, because I'd be interested to hear their thoughts on this kind of thing. Is there anybody willing to take a chance and say a few words? No?
I can comment on that from a merchant. If there aren't any merchants on the call, I'm more than happy to comment.
I think Dave Woodward may be about to see something. He's got that look in his eye.
I was, and Jeff's probably holding his head in his hands, because when myself and Jeff get talking, we'll be here all afternoon.
But I've got a 1 o'clock and it's really important. Just
No, I mean, to be fair, I mean, thinking of obviously commodity increases, thinking of supply shortages, etc. So for those of you who don't know, I work for Wolseley, so I'm very much thinking around the plumbing, heating, boilers, radiators, bathroom suites, etc. I suppose one of the key elements from a merchant such as ourselves back to housing providers is, you know, is there an understanding and is there a flexibility for housing providers in terms of specification? So as an example of that, if I take something very simple such as maybe a bathroom basin, the specification for a particular housing provider might be a XYZ, and that's what we've been supplying for perhaps many years. But if there are shortages of that particular specification, we don't supply just one basin, we'll supply hundreds of different basins, and more often than not, we can continue that supply with a different specification and alternative product. Similarly, when you're thinking of costings, you know, if there's a particular localized cost increase in a particular area, there's usually a number of value engineering options that might be available. So I suppose the question back from us is, we always have a solution to look at either other product or cost saving value engineering if there is that flexibility back from the housing provider.
Good point, Dave. And I think yeah, we could talk about it for a long time, couldn't we? We normally do, you and I. But yeah, I think there is, you know, we are at a situation where, you know, we have to be more innovative, we have to be more bespoke, I think, and we have to offer alternatives. But I think we also need to be able to explain them in a much more refined way than perhaps we do at the moment, if I can use that phraseology. You know, John, you were going to say something, I think.
Well, Dave's probably made a very, very valid point. I mean, I think it's really about creative solutions. On the manufacturer side, yesterday, Marshalls is obviously one of the major providers, particularly of landscaping products. They're now offering extended delivery hours to merchants, so they're going in from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6:30 in the evening, and also they're offering delivery services at the weekend. So, if you like, it's one example of how a manufacturer is responding to the issues. The point I was going to make on material price increases is that most merchants will have passed these increases through to their customers, you know, whether they be jobbing builders or house builders or, you know, or guys like yourselves, who in turn are passing on to the end consumer. And the interesting thing is, we are not seeing yet big increases in inflation, because you've only got to look at the inflation figures to, you know, to realize they're still very, very low. So these price increases that you're talking about are not yet filtering through the system and coming out the other end as far as the consumers, whether they're paying for that bathroom suite or that new property they're buying. Now, there has to come a point in time when that will change, but so far there's actually been minimal impact on the UK inflation of these raw material price increases. But 30, 40, 50, 60% price increases is very much the norm, particularly in heavy building materials and particularly timber related materials.
Yep, absolutely. Can we just go to the next slide, if we may, Andrew? Okay. So what we want to look at now, and I think it is quite relevant because this is sort of quite flowing, is the current material supply. You know, how does that look at the moment across the categories? Can we cater for the demands at the moment? Are we, as our supply chains resilient? Are they able to flex, as we were just talking about, both in the construction sector and I also think in R&M, you know, because that's a big area. Maintenance, particularly within the housing sector, or the social housing sector, is hugely important because it's member satisfaction, isn't it? And it's tenant satisfaction that's the driver behind this. If I may, I'd like to bring in Atul from CEF, because Atul, you are very close to this, and perhaps I'd like to hear how you see it from an electrical point of view.
Jeff, good morning, and good morning to everybody that's on the call. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm not still muted.
No, you're not.
Here.
Great. And I know, Jeff, you'd probably want me muted on a number of occasions, but today's clearly not there. I kind of want to take something from what Dave said earlier, and he raised a valid point about specification, etc. So from an R&M perspective, you're absolutely right. So I represent a business that is predominantly working with the responsive, the first time fix, the planned, etc. What I have seen over the last 12 to 24 months is the market change a little bit, whereas I guess client and housing associations were very, very particular, very, very specific about the brands, the manufacturers, etc. I think what for us to be impacted by third parties and, you know, items that are Brexit related, we've taken the lead on saying, well, you know, we're a British manufacturer, we'll source things responsibly, we'll make sure that we've got enough stock levels within our locations, etc., to achieve that. The biggest demand we're getting is that housing associations have KPIs to meet, that first time KPI. And it's weirdly enough, I was watching the news over the last couple of days, and the biggest thing at the moment on news is the disrepair claims, and you know, there's been a big piece about that. So from that perspective, Jeff, I think from an electrical wholesaler perspective, I think people are very open. Clients have become very open-minded about alternative products to achieve that first-time fix. The biggest change we've seen, probably, Jeff, is meeting demands of manufacturing, because last year everybody shut their manufacturing because of the pandemic. And it's probably taken them best part 6 to 8 months to play catch up. But I think what it's done, and just to go back what Dave was saying earlier about specification, and certainly on the electrical side of it, I think clients have become more open, saying, well, what can we do? What do we need to buy to make it, able to achieve our first time fix? Hopefully that kind of answers your question, Jeff.
I think it does, and it actually leads very nicely into a point that was made earlier on, I think by Karen, about this situation that we've had recently with the motor industry and the sensors and things like that. And I'd like to bring in Andy Green here, if I may, because Andy represents Flamefast, who is one of the manufacturers and has a great insight into the current situation in electrics and electronics. And I think it will demonstrate to people some of the issues that relate also to this thing with the motor industry. So Andy, could you give us a bit of a view from a manufacturer's perspective with regards to this current electronic situation?
Hi, Jeff, you okay?
Yeah, fine.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Obviously the last 12 months have been challenging, to say the least, and I think there's a variety of different problems out there. I mean, obviously the manufacturing industry for electronics, I think, has been hit pretty much hardest by the lack of semiconductors, which is anything with a processor, whether it be a laptop, a phone, PlayStation's, Xbox, which is all sort of kind of had big launches, and the demand for consumer electronics has gone through the roof. And then, as Atul pointed out, we've had issues with people going on shutdown for a few months. And when you combine that sort of catch up with a few of the sort of the global issues we've had, like there was a large factory fire in Japan, and that was one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers in the world. And that pretty much brought the entire Asian car market to a halt for a couple of weeks, to the point where government stood on the doorstep going, well, when's it going to stop burning? And we then had knock-on effects with things like the freak weather they had in Texas, which shut down Samsung and NXP for a month. And I mean, again, a lot of these are sort of household names, and getting hold of materials people are trying to forecast. And this is, as everybody knows, when you're trying to say, oh, this is what we want and this is where we want it, it's becoming increasingly difficult because of the obviously supply and demand issues. We're getting to a stage where people aren't even committing to offering delivery dates until they've got a firm order in place. Main reason that they don't need to. If you don't buy it, somebody else will. There's queues forming quite rapidly. Products going on allocation all over the place, and it's not just sort of the semiconductors that is the problem. It's then the knock-on effect, because if somebody can't build something, they then obviously look to see what else they can do with the parts, and it creates a sort of a global shortage across the board, because people are trying to get one small component which is sat on somebody else's shelf that they can't finish because they're missing one small part of it. And
is this a global issue then?
It is. I mean, we're seeing it, even things like plastics. Obviously, most things that are built from an electronic perspective come in a plastic enclosure, which comes in a cardboard box. Plastics, because of the issues with crude oil, we're getting increases almost on a sort of two weekly basis at the minute on plastics. And then we're seeing the same on cardboard. I think in the last 4 weeks, we've had 4 price notification increases on cardboard alone. I mean, a lot of that's actually because people are sat at home a lot more and doing a lot more online shopping, and everything comes in a box.
Yeah.
So it's little things which the way the pandemic's kind of shaping, I suppose, the world, little things that you don't think of, like you online shopping at home, has a big knock-on effect to raw materials.
Right. So, if we talk about these sensors things, which are, I just would like to, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, Andy. These are the same sensors that are affecting the motor industry, aren't they?
It is. Well, a semiconductor is quite a broad term. It's basically a processor or a driver. So, I mean, like we manufacture a lot of different sensors, and in that you have a main printed circuit board and we have a display. Each of them contains a driver. Your car will contain more than one. And it's, I mean, at the minute the standard drive we used to use for our LCD was on about 8 weeks. We're now being advised on one of the suppliers that we can't get them until January. And again, it's this whole thing of, again, what Atul said, whereas people have shut down for 2 or 3 months because they don't know what's going on. They're still playing catch up from that initial shutdown. Plus, they've then got the surge in demand, and then they're hit with all these other incidents, should we say, which, all come together to make a not so pretty picture. A semiconductor will be in anything electronic pretty much. That isn't just a hardwired device.
Yeah, I mean, my point really was that I think that this delay that we've got in these kind of boards and sensors and things like that, they affect so many things that we are involved with on a day-to-day basis, that have them there. Smoke alarms have them, don't they? Fans have them. So from an electronics point of view and an electrical point of view, there is quite an impact in that regard, isn't there?
There is, and people are getting more and more creative. I mean, at the minute, it's kind of changed a lot of the way manufacturers work in regards to dual sourcing. I mean, we're at a stage now where a lot of our products, we're looking at 2 or 3 sources on every sort of key component that we can't just get off the shelf somewhere. Yes, it costs a fair chunk of money to get to that stage, because you've got the design, the testing, the retooling, running concurrent products. But I think if you don't do that, then again, it's that the whole thing just falls flat. All it takes is one little component to say, oh no, we've had an issue, and you're stuck.
Okay.
I mean, it's the same with PlayStation at the minute. There's a big demand for them again because people are sat at home and they can't ship any.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Jeff, I've got a question for you, Jeff.
Yeah, sure.
Just on the back of what Andy was saying, one thing that I've noticed, Jeff, is the compliance has been a big driver. So, you know, you mentioned fire detection, etc. We saw the announcement, you know, and I've obviously noticed from the guest list here that there are representation from the Housing Association. The compliance was saying, you know, the upgrades of the LD3s to the LD2 fire detection, you know, on the back of what's happened and the sad news of Grenfell, etc. So compliance has been a massive driver where everybody's been given a deadline to achieve those, you know, the end game. So whilst there's legislations in the back pushing that things need to be done by a period, whether it be April this year, etc., what that hasn't done is worked in parallel with manufacturing, because every single housing association are saying, well, we need to meet these deadlines, but how can we meet these deadlines if the production doesn't fall in line? So I'd be keen to know how the housing associations are actually dealing with that. And the impact that's having, because obviously, you know, one goes with the other.
Well, I think it's a very fair point, and it leads on very interestingly to a question that Marie from Benicia has actually posed on the chat. Do you think there is a greater requirement for continuity of supply and price stability? There are often short-term product alternatives that can be arranged, and these are not always at the same price points as the original product. I think this comes back to what you said earlier on, Dave, with regards to alternatives. Yeah, alternatives is fine, but we also have to be very, very aware about the compliance aspect of it from, as Atul has just brought out, and also that the price points don't pinch too hard. You know, yes, Karen, please.
Yeah, I don't think it's just about necessarily the compliance aspect of it and the price points as well. There's a huge trust and education piece to be done with clients as well. A lot of the time they'll write something into a specification because it's what they've always done, or it's what a consultant wrote for them 10 years earlier, and it's followed them through the path. And so then if the contractor that's working with them, or another consultant, or someone internally says, actually, we think you should change that component because of this, this, and this, it will take quite a bit of education to make that happen sometimes, because there's what I've always known and what I've always done, and that is what I will continue to do. So the price almost becomes irrelevant in some cases, because you're spending so much time trying to justify the new course of action. I'm not sure if anyone's experienced that on the other side.
I would absolutely agree with you there, Karen. And to be fair, a couple of things that I'd just written down to mention. You know, is there a greater requirement now to start looking at that life expectancy and the full lifetime cost of a product? And you know, you say there's a confidence there with the housing providers. Is there a role that the merchant can play in partnership with key manufacturers to work with housing providers to drive that greater confidence in certain products? And, you know, for many years now, you know, we've looked at, you know, that full lifetime cost. You know, actually there's, you know, different products can support tenants in a different way from an aesthetics or a welfare point of view. But actually, alongside that, there's the water saving, energy saving, decarbonisation of those products. Then bring into that kind of like package, if you like. So, you know, certainly there's a role for the merchant to play there, but how we actually do that and how we can actually drive that in practice with housing associations would be interesting to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Marie, does that address what you were talking about? There you are.
Jeff, I'm from Wolseley. Just sorry. The point I was trying to get at is a lot of the queries that I receive, which is generally from our sales team, so from our field team, the reactions are needed quite quickly. So it's normally we've run out of X. Is there an alternative? And so then I have to try very quickly to establish whether there is something that we already supply, or if there isn't, where I can get that from. Now, the balance that I always have is the supply continuity the most important part? And it does relate to product type as well. So if it's a small fitting, then probably it's much easier to fit an alternative than it would be a specified boiler, for instance. But it's quite difficult.
I think we're losing you, Marie.
From a buyer's perspective, to know what the most important factors are. I understand all the compliance aspects. Sorry, Jeff.
No, carry on. We're hearing you now. You dropped off for a minute then.
Oh, sorry. I wondered what you said. So yeah, from a sort of procurement perspective, it's do I need to find something? Obviously, you always try to think of the price points and get an alternative product that's near or similar to that, but that's not always possible. We will also work with suppliers on that as well to do as much as you can. But from my perspective, it's what is the most important thing? And I guess it does relate to category type, but is it that continuity of supply, or is it the price point? Because one can create a quicker reaction than the other. So if the price point isn't as sensitive, then actually it might be easier to find an alternative very quickly. So I was just trying to gauge sort of thoughts on those two different aspects.
Well, I think it's a very valid point. You know, I think if we can just flip over to the next slide, please, Andrew, because this is quite an interesting slide, I think you might find, because this was very kindly, John allowed me to actually to put this up, and I think this was, it shows some of the issues that we have. I mean, obviously timber is up there, so very much as we were talking about earlier, but look at some of the other things here there that have got some real effect on where we're going in the future. You know, paints and varnishes, and I'm sure some of the merchants on the call will see that kind of issue. But a lot of these are building materials that we are, you know, we're involved with every day. You know, but look at some of the issues that we've got here. You know, I was personally, I was stunned with screws and fixings, long delivery, and the outlook as though it's going to be the same. You know, which I didn't really realize. You know, so I don't know, does anybody want to make some comment about that? Or does it make sort of sense?
It makes sense, but from if you're working in housing associations and you're telling someone they're about to have their bathroom replaced, and then they say, but we might leave you without a basin for a few weeks because everything else, but we can't get this bit now. So obviously that's not going to happen. But what that will do is put pressure on contractors to really train their resident liaison teams, to really communicate with the client, to make sure that the planning takes into account these supply chain delays. And that sort of forward thinking isn't always there. And that's not a slight on contractors. We all have sat in a room where someone's gone, well, we didn't know that was going to happen. In this case, I think we'd be kind of remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there were huge problems with supply chain, and actually then pass that knowledge on to clients so that they could then make the right contingencies, perhaps put it into their business risk registers, rather than just thinking about the today and the tomorrow. And in fact, Marie, I think from your perspective, Dave sort of alluded to it, and he was talking about that whole life costing of things. Whole life costing doesn't just comply with massive products. It can be tiny products as well, and tiny commodities. If you've got a switchboard that might last 10 years but costs 5% more, where the one that you were using has a life cycle of 2 years, then actually the logical thing to do would be to present to that client that that's what you should put across your stock. So yes, the product availability issue is huge, Jeff, but again, I go back to that education piece. Do your end users know that this is coming? And have you made them aware of what they're going to have to do to communicate effectively with people?
I would support that. I think that when you look at this kind of thing, it brings home that do we actually do we transmit that to housing associations and local authorities and things like that, that there are these areas that when you're planning your business resilience plan, are you taking this into account? Because these are major issues that could have a real effect on how you can complete your projects.
I mean, Jeff, we're coming up to summer months, so we'll have every HA and council in the country saying we're going to really start our cyclical decks programs now. And what are we missing? Paint and roof tile.
Yeah.
I just picking up on Karen's point, the absolute critical issue now is communication. So I've done a number of presentations through the Federation of Master Builders or the Home Builders Federation to their members on using the slides. This is obviously one of the slides that I used in my presentation, Jeff, that you came along to, which by the way has probably changed because it's a couple of weeks old now.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, merchants typically have a customer base that comes into that branch that says, I want these materials and I want them now, and they're used to having that kind of service. Now, that level of service is just it's not possible within this current situation. So we're having to educate collectively merchants, house builders, housing authorities, planners. I've done a similar presentation of planners to say, you cannot operate the way that you've been used to operating in this environment. You know, if you're building properties or you're about to start those properties in 6 weeks time, 8 weeks time, 12 weeks time, and you need materials, we need to know that now, not the day before that project is due to happen. So absolutely critical to getting through this crisis, which we will get through. You know, there will be an end to this, is that open communication right the way throughout the supply chain. In terms of our end users used to it, if I take the number of interviews I've done with the Guardian, the Times, you know, Fixed Radio, whoever it might be, I can honestly tell you that the press are more than aware of the availability situation and have picked it up. And again, we don't want to scaremonger because that's the worst possible thing that we can do, but we do need to educate people to say there is a problem. It's a global problem. It's not a UK specific problem. And therefore, ways of working need to change in this current situation. Thanks
for that, John. Can you just flip to the next one, please, Andrew? You know, as we all know, I mean, a large percentage of products and goods are supplied from overseas, you know, which assist the cost and things like that. And, you know, invariably there are consolidated freight models that people adopt to minimize the logistics costs. This slide, I think, is astonishing, as it sees the effect of the global demand on containers. And look at the rise. It's huge. You know, it's almost 400% in, you know, by the end of February. And that all adds to that supply capability, because it isn't only price. You know, we're not talking, when we're talking about some of the projects that we get involved with, we all get involved with, it's not always price that's the driver. It's the ability to supply, and it's the it's that stability, so to make sure that we get the right thing. So going on from what John just said, it's about that communication. If we can see what's coming up, but in the current situation, price will be affected because everything is on that container. And if that container isn't available, or it's available at the ridiculous prices that they are at the moment, then, you know, we're going to have issues that are not going to go away tomorrow. You know, so if we look at another, anybody want to make a comment on that? John, do you want to say anything on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it depends if your glass is half full or half empty, Jeff. I would say if you look at, and we've updated that slide, I think, slightly since this was produced, but container prices have started to come down, and we're not seeing the level of issues that we were seeing pre-Christmas, which of course, you know, we had a combination.
I'm on mute.
Right? We had a combination of COVID related and Brexit related issues that were impacting on container issues. And by the way, UK manufactured product account for something like 76% of all the building materials that we use in the UK. So we're not a heavy import reliant country. But of course, there are products, bathroom enclosures, bathroom suites, shower enclosures, screws and fixings, power tools that are imported products and therefore have been tied up with this. So we're starting to see a slight easing of the situation and the removal of some of the surcharges that were applied because of the cost of a 40-foot container, which, as you can see from that graph, basically went from something like just under $2,000 to $15,000. We even had one company paying $25,000 for a container because they were desperate to get the stock in. So, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately we've got this perfect storm of issues around capacity and availability and demand driven with import and container issues. But we are starting to see a slight easing of this, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. Darren has put a thing on construction historically has been somewhat adversarial. Is there perhaps a reluctance among supply chains to communicate shortage issues with clients for fear of any contractual dispute, a situation arising? My response to that, Darren, would be that in the current situation, I think we have to be a little bit more realistic, but interested to hear what perhaps merchants would say to that.
Can I just pick up on that issue, because I would totally agree with that comment. I think what COVID has brought over the last 13 months is the construction industry coming together collectively under the Construction Leadership Council, which has never happened before in this industry. We're a complex industry. There's 200 trade associations responsible for this industry. What you've seen through the Construction Leadership Council is exactly the reversal of that situation, where contractors, house builders, merchants, manufacturers have come together to tackle the impact of COVID. So while I agree with that historical statement, I do think that situation is changing. And I think the product availability statements that we're now producing on the Construction Leadership website, they are designed for people like yourselves to share with your customers and other people within the supply chain, to be open and honest about the supply chain issues that we're facing. And also there's been lots of work done on contractual disputes, by the way, through the CLC. So I think I'd like to positively say that I see that situation changing. Never in the history of this industry have we seen the number of organisations coming together to address the specific issues and challenges of COVID, and that will continue.
Great.
Can I make a slight caveat to that, John? Just a small one, because in the interest of fairness. So I agree, COVID brought an awful lot of people together, and they were looking at things very holistically, it's fair to say. So contractual terms, they weren't necessarily as tough as they might have been, because there was an understanding and a realisation. But unfortunately, a lot of people in our sectors are now faced with job losses and huge cuts in what they're doing, and that is in housing associations, that's in FM companies, and as a result of that, some of that adversarial behaviour is coming back, but it's very sort of one-on-one. It's very much about interpersonal items rather than that sort of more global element. And I suppose, so Darren's point there about that reluctance because of a contractual dispute arising, there's certainly still a little nuance in the background of people just saying, actually, hold up, I have to protect myself first. And it's not even necessarily a business issue. It can be interpersonal. So totally agree that the work that the CLC has done has been phenomenal. But I think we've still got to be very cautious that people are worried about how we come out of this as individuals and the impact it's having on their own jobs. And as a result, they might try to save money and think that that's the right thing to do by coming down hard on a contractor who then has to come hard down on their supply chain. So just something to consider. So my little caveat.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Karen. I think on the jobs front, one of the other things that's emerged from the CLC is the construction industry talent retention scheme. and that's had about £1.2 million worth of government funding. The whole purpose of the TRS scheme was that if anybody loses their jobs in any aspect of construction industry, there is a system now where they can, post their CVs, people from within the industry. And I know a lot of my members are actually using the TRS scheme because we're a sector that's recruiting currently. We're actually struggling to find people, particularly young. There's massive unemployment among 16 to 24-year-olds, but I know that Dave's found the answer, but you talk to merchants, they're really struggling to get people in. And the Kickstart scheme is a great concept, but in reality, it's taken far too long to get up and running. And we're still not seeing those vacancies filled. So we're actually an industry that's recruiting currently, not losing people. Most of my merchants are actively recruiting staff, and we're using the TRS scheme to try and find people from within the construction industry.
Yep. Okay, can we go to the next one, please, Andrew? Okay, this is very quick, and I'm very conscious of the time and that we're not going to be able to cover everything if I don't hurry up. So, this was just a statement really of some HD and PP and and PE, and it's quite interesting. And when we send this out, this will be included in it. But I am conscious of the time, so hopefully you'll allow me to just clip over that one. But it is interesting. It is very interesting because these are things that are actually affecting virtually everything that we do. So if we could, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. I do think that we've got some reason to look to the future, the kind of things that I think that we need to do are the business continuity initiatives. I mean, we need to have sustained value for money. We need to make sure that we've got the right materials in the right place at the right time. So, the cost maintenance aspect of it. And I think it was mentioned earlier on that we also need to be perhaps a little bit more flexible in our approach to materials supply. This is not like the old days, and so I just invite comment from anybody in those regards for the moment. Anybody got anything to say? No?
Jeff, it's... Oh, sorry.
Go on, Marie.
Oh, all I was going to say is I do still think that the flexibility approach it is needed, but I do think it's twofold. One is very short term. So how can we bridge a supply gap? Because it's not always, we don't always get 3 months notice that there's going to be a supply issue of a particular product. It could be a week or two before, which gives you a very short amount of time to actually find an alternative. So I do think it needs to be sort of viewed in the two angles. One is from a very short-term reactive issue, and then there's the longer term. So actually those discussions about alternative products that have a longer lifespan on them, that might be a bit more expensive up front, but actually would have a much greater lifespan on them. So I think there's the two different approaches. One, we're about to run out of product X. It's absolutely critical for a heating install. What are we going to do about it? Which you wouldn't be able to have lots and lots of different conversations with lots of different housing providers or the engineers, because you need to react quickly, versus those, if you have got a product where there is going to be a long-term supply issue, such as baths, then that's a different conversation. So I think it's twofold. I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, I think what I was really what I'm thinking with the flexibility of that material supply, I think we have to think outside the box at times, and just what we've got on the shelf is not necessarily the right answer for that requirement from our members and things like that. I think it brings in very nicely Karen, just to give us a background of something that we did very, very recently, which involved, you know, massive communication and interaction between CEF, Bill Base, and Wolseley to provide a solution. And perhaps you could just give us a very quick thumbnail of what we did, Karen, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, basically was working with a housing association that brought their repair service in-house with 3 weeks notice. Why 3 weeks notice? I'll still never get to the bottom of that, but I think the gist of it was that the intention was to terminate much further down the line, and a few things happened. So at that point, you have to obviously make a decision on how you're going to approach things. And as an HA, I advise them daily on their procurement activities, and it would have been foolish or remiss of me to go off and decide to set up my own supply chain arrangement for them. There's no way that was going to happen. They didn't have the in-house expertise. So we approached Fusion21, Jeff particularly, and Jeff basically said to me, calm down, everything's fine, go and have a cup of tea. And I thought, that's very nice. Really, are you sure? But he did. Now, the long and short of that was that they obviously brought the repair service in-house, and we knew that they needed to replace their supply merchant. But there were lots of nuances with that, because there was no reporting in place. There was no ability to check stock. There was no ability for operatives to record, because they're in the process of re-procuring the repairs management system. It's just one of these things. Everything has gone back to paper and pen. So we had to work really, really closely with the supply chain to understand what they could do in that 3 week period, but also how we could get them to a point where they didn't just have, we originally just wanted one supplier, to be honest, because we were thinking, well, that would be the right thing to do in terms of their overall cost management, the structures around it, all of their mechanisms. But quite quickly, we realised that the operatives on the ground were going, we can't get the materials that we need from X, and so we're still going off and doing Y and Z. But what was happening was they were paying, you know, rack rates. And we said, well, you can't do that. So we then had to onboard another 2 specialist suppliers. And actually that's worked really well, but not just for the repairs function. So they've had quite a broad sweeping change at this housing association, new director of asset. There's lots of people sitting underneath that with lots of new ideas, new ways of doing things. They hadn't had a kitchen and bathroom programme. They hadn't had a boiler replacement programme, no cyclical decks programme for about 5 years, because their wholly owned subsidiary was in charge of it. But it wasn't necessarily planned, it was very sporadic. And we realised that if you have this supply chain arrangement with fantastic rates, why not actually bolt on the kitchens, the bathrooms, the boilers, all the commodities that go with that? And we've just in the last 2 weeks gone out to actually just appoint the contractors who will work with that HA to fit the materials, but they won't supply. So we've kind of given ourselves a little bit of assurance and certainty in doing it that way round. We're not relying on the contractor having that extra notch in the chain. We're now going back to the basics of actually, this is the programme, these are the kitchens that you're going to have, these are the components, these are the units, these are all the bits that are needed for the bathrooms. We need those by that date delivered to that property, and we pass that risk back onto the merchants. Sneaky? I'm not sure, but it seems to work. So it's certainly a way that we've managed to mitigate a little bit of risk for an HA.
Hey, Karen, it's working. Don't say not sure. It is working.
I don't, you know what, my glasses, someone, was it John that said about having the glass half full? My glass is like properly empty at the minute, John, so maybe you need to give me a pep talk.
Karen, just picking up on what you said there, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think it's interesting your comment there, because certainly over the last few months, 6 months or so, I've had more conversations with HAs where they're looking at moving away from that perhaps one-stop shop typical supply to more of that split lot, because then you actually get the expertise. So whether that is plumbing, heating, electrical, building materials, timber, whatever that might be, and it's not just necessarily expertise in terms of the actual product specification and experience, but the expertise in terms of supply as well, and managing the supply chain that sits behind that, and managing the forecasting and delivery schedules for those planned works. And actually, you know, delivering a load of timber, a load of blocks, some boilers, a load of wire, and you know, they're very different commodities. It's all in construction, but there's very different nuances that sit behind that you need that skills and expertise in. So I think, you know, it's interesting your comments there. I think we'll see probably a you know, a more step away from that one-stop supply and you know, bring in that experience.
I agree. I mean, I'll be honest with you, looking at it from a resident's perspective, it would be the ideal scenario for me as a resident. I'd be sitting saying, so my gas engineer knows exactly what he needs to do. He needs to replace this part. He can talk to the merchant while he's on site. And with this boiler, this is my problem. Okay, I don't have that part, but this is what I can get to fix this. We'll get it out to you today. If we'd gone to the main merchant for that sake, A, they wouldn't have been able to give the advice, and B, they wouldn't have been able to get the part. The resident would have then been left without heat and potentially hot water. Then a complaint comes in. So it's about trying to limit the number of visits, the number of exposures to people, particularly in a COVID world. Why would we send operatives to someone's property repeatedly? We just want to go in, mask, sanitize, get the job done, get back out again. And you know, there's lots of rationale around doing what they're doing.
Karen, I'm sorry to just chop you off there, but I know that John's got to leave us in a few minutes, and I just wanted to cover this last part of the increased use of technology, and particularly eTIM, because I think eTIM is of great interest to a lot of people in our sector, and it's a standardized digital data kind of idea. It's to digitize the data. You know how often we look at you know, we want to buy this, we don't know whether that description's right, whether that part number's right, and then this kind of thing. John, just before you go, could I ask you to give just a very, very quick overview of this? And if it is of interest, guys, we would be more than happy to host another webinar just on this one subject, because I think it is a bigger subject, but I think it is of great interest to the sector.
Yeah, I mean, I won't be able to do it justice in 2 minutes, but
No.
eTIM is a standard classification model that was developed in the electrotechnical area and is now starting to move into HVAC products and also heavy building materials. So we're at the start of the eTIM journey. It stands for eTIM Technical Information Model. It's pretty much the standard classification model that's used throughout the whole of Europe, particularly for electrical products. So, and you know, the principle is that you have one standard definition of the technical qualities of a product, and that's the same whether it's in the UK or whether it's in Germany or whether it's in France. Now, we are looking for a number of trailblazers. I know Fusion21 are looking to become a trailblazer. Travis Perkins is a trailblazer. So they are now using the eTIM classification model will be for all of their products. So yeah, I think it warrants a separate conversation around eTIM, but digitalization is going to become an even more critical issue. I think what we've seen in merchants is a clamour over the last 12, 13 months to digitalize their business. So you've got a lot of the smaller independents now who are wanting to trade online, realizing that the data that they've got is pretty inadequate. You know, you've got manufacturers supplying 5 merchants with 5 different types of product information, and it's a nonsense, quite frankly. So we want to get one standard system that everybody in the building materials industry uses. It's not a PIM system, it's not a product information modeling system, it's a classification system. So yeah, we're keen to raise the profile. We've invested heavily in eTIM, and I think, Jeff, you've suggested we run a separate forum on eTIM. I think that would be a great idea for anybody that's interested.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. And a couple of people have commented that they would like to have a look as well. So we'll actually organise that shortly. Go to the next one. And
thank you, guys. I'm going to have to leave. So, but thanks Jeff, for the
very
invitation.
much, John.
Hope that was useful for everybody, and hopefully see you on another call.
Thanks for your input, John. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, bye.
Bye. Do we have any questions and comments that we've missed? Does anybody have anything to add if they want to? Or have we covered what we really wanted to get to? We will be sending out a recording of everything that's gone on today, and a copy of the presentation anyway. You know, and if anybody does have any questions, afterthoughts or whatever, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. I hope you found that interesting. I hope it's reasonable. Yeah, there is one question, sorry. How are we addressing issues raised by the Grenfell inquiry, where manufacturers acted less than honestly regarding their products and the suitability for use? Interesting question. Who would like to give a response to that?
Don't think our PI covers it, Jeff, to be honest.
No, I don't know whether I should, you know.
Sometimes you just have to,
yeah, I think what Grenfell, I mean, I remember going to Grenfell, I don't know, 20 odd years ago, and looking at it and thinking, my God, this looks a little bit interesting. The gap between the wall and the cladding, particularly, you know, I think Grenfell really made us more aware of what we've got to be doing. And I think, you know, I don't think it's finished yet. I don't think that that the repercussions of it are anywhere near finished, but I think it's made us more aware of what we need to be doing and the suitability of product for particular aspects. It would be, I think, HA ...15 minutes. I know people are very, very busy, but I would like to thank you all for joining in, and hopefully it's been of really business resilience in the future. And one of the ideas that we've got, that I don't know whether people would be interested in, but is to form a business resilience group. By that we can regularly look at the situation that we've got in the market, where people can be more aware of trends and movements and innovation, and it's something that, you know, we feel might be of benefit to all, both members and merchants. I don't know if anybody's got a comment on that. Dave, you normally have comments on these things.
No, I mean, to be fair, I was just thinking there that you know, I mean, first of all, thank you very much, Jeff, Karen. It's been, you know, it's been a great discussion to be on. Absolutely, you know, there's a few key takeaways that I'll go away and discuss back, you know, within our organisation. We'd be very keen to join further discussions, maybe around specific topics.
Yeah.
The key points for me, we've already kind of said, you know, flexible approach to specification, absolutely. How we can work closer within the supply chain with HAs around that lifetime cost of product, I think is perhaps critical. There's been a few comments around sort of like, you know, are we as merchants passing supply issues back into, you know, up the chain to, you know, and actually that's one takeaway that we'll have a look at there. But also just thinking, you know, how can we perhaps work closer with the whole supply chain, so HAs all the way down through contractors, in terms of that forecasting for planned works. Absolutely realise that responsive maintenance is exactly that, responsive, but when we're looking at planned works, you know, how can we move that out to a 4, 6, 8 week window? Nobody wakes up on a morning and suddenly decides that they're going to go and change Mr. and Mrs. Smith's bathroom today. That's planned in weeks in advance. But how do we get that information all the way through the supply chain? So there's an awful lot of stuff that we could talk about for the rest of the afternoon. You know, I would absolutely welcome further discussions on in little bite-sized pieces around some of those perhaps specific points.
Okay, thanks. I mean, what we'll do is we'll put together some something like that, and we'll address certain things. I do think this resilience group might be interesting for people to sort of. It's an informal group, and we can have a look at things. You know, so yeah, we'll have a look at that. And there is another question from Aliona. Will it be possible to get an up-to-date product availability issue table, please? Yeah, Aliona, we'll try to put something like that together for you, and we'll release it to everybody. I don't think it would be that much of an issue. I think we can work with the merchants to see where we've got some real problems, and yeah, we'll leave that with us, and we'll come back to you on that one.
Jeff, it's on the CIC website as well, I think, so you can always put a link to that.
Sorry?
I think it's on the CIC website as well, so you could always put a link to that, and then people can check.
Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. But we'll yeah, we'll address that, and I think it would be useful. And that's the kind of thing that probably I was thinking about with regards to this resilience, is that if we could do that on a regular basis, I think it would be an added advantage to everybody to have a look at those kind of things. Would that, do you think that would be useful, Karen? Yep.
I know I said definitely, but I'm now thinking about line of duty, because I've said definitely, because that seems to be the biggest clue in the whole thing. That's the way to finish, Jeff.
That's the way to finish, guys. Thank you all very much. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll try and do another one of these shortly. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.